Alright, so let's get this cracking. So in this video, I'm going to be touching on a man called James Thornton. And the reason why I'm going to be touching on James Thornton is because in 1755, Benjamin Franklin, who resided in Pennsylvania, he wrote an essay called The Observations Concerning Mankind. And towards the very end of that essay, he was complaining about Swarthy Germans swarming the colony of Pennsylvania, because at that time you had a large influx of Germans who was immigrated to Pennsylvania. And I believe that this man, James Thornton, is a descendant of those individuals who were swarming the colony of Pennsylvania during the 18th century. And I'm going to prove it in this video. So just to give some background on James Thornton, it says, James Thornton was an American abolitionist and businessman in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A freeborn African American, he became a sailmaker after the American Revolutionary War. Following an apprenticeship, he became the foreman and bought the sail loft when his boss retired. Based on equipment he himself had developed, he established a highly profitable business. He was located on the busy waterfront of the Delaware River in an area now called Penn's Landing. So this is him right here, a portrait of James Thornton circa 1834. And he was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he died there too. So if we just go down here, it says, James Thornton was born free on September the 2nd, 1766 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. One of the two children of Thomas and Margaret Thornton, a Philadelphia sailmaker. Thomas Thornton was the grandson of a slave who had freed himself. Yeah, so this is where they try to superimpose slavery on every so-called black person in America. And they try to assert that every single black person in America is in fact a descendant of a slave that got bought from the west coast of Africa. And it's funny because when you look into the primary sources for this man's life, there's nothing even alluding to him being a descendant of a slave. This is just what modern day scholarship are purporting. Because when you look into the reference for this source, it says A Gentleman of Color, The Life of James Thornton, Oxford University Press, published in 2002. So this is just, it's just modern day scholarship. The source is contemporary to this man's life, has nothing to do with this man being a slave or being a descendant of a slave. There's nothing of the sort. And we're going to prove that shortly. But before we even get into that, I wanted to prove the origins of this man, James Thornton, because his name Thornton is a German last name. As you can see here, Thornton history, family crest and coat of arms, Germany. And this is a website called houseofnames.com. And it says here, the surname Thornton was first found in the Rhineland, where this family was a prominent contributor to the development of the district from ancient times. Always influential in social affairs, the name Thorpe became an integral part of that turbulent region as it forged alliances with other families within the region and the nation. So Rhineland, that's just a region in Germany. And here it just gives the different variations for the name Thornton. So right here I took a screenshot from a website called ancestry.co.uk. And it shows people the surname Thornton that immigrated to Pennsylvania during the 1700s. So here's a woman named Maria Katharina Thornton, arrival year 1742 in Pennsylvania. You see that? And when you read down below, it says the source bibliography, 18th century immigrants from German-speaking lands to North America. Publications of the publications from the Pennsylvania German Society. So that's one screenshot I took. This is another. This person's name was Jonas Thornton, arrival year 1742, Pennsylvania. And bottom it says the same thing. 18th century immigrants from German speaking. So here's an excerpt from the website called GermanSociety.org, and it's just going to give a brief account on the Germans who immigrated to Pennsylvania. So it says here, since its founding in 1764, the German Society of Pennsylvania has served Philadelphia's German community. Between the 1680s and the American Revolution, the majority of an estimated 100,000 German-speaking immigrants coming to North America settled in Pennsylvania, making up a third of Philadelphia's population by the 1760s. So these were the people that Benjamin Franklin was complaining about. And I'm going to be going into the excerpt pretty soon. These immigrants often arrived in a miserable state after long sea voyages known for unhealthy conditions. In response to their plight, on December 26, 1764, 65 prominent German colonists established an organization for the relief of distressed Germans. Over the course of its 250-year history, the society has evolved with the changing needs of the German-American population of Philadelphia. Okay, so now just going into something else. But yeah, the main premise that I wanted to establish is the fact that the large influxes of Germans that were swarming the colony of Pennsylvania. And a lot of these Germans were black Germans. So yeah, now we're going to prove that a lot of those Germans who were swarming the colony of Pennsylvania were in fact black Germans. And it comes out of the horse's mouth, Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, who lived during that time period. He was a contemporary, he was an eyewitness, so he witnessed these things with his own eyes when he saw a lot of these black Germans immigrate into the colony which he dwelt in, and that being Pennsylvania. So here's the article, Swarthy Germans, and it quotes from Benjamin Franklin's essay, which was entitled Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, which was published in 1755. And it says here, Louis Rambaud adds some valuable perspective to the immigration debate by citing some of Ben Franklin's thoughts on the horrors of the US being overrun by German immigrants. So it says here, why should the Palatine Boers, so the Palatine Boers is a reference to Germans, be suffered to swarm into our settlements and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens? So when he said Pennsylvania founded by the English, he's referencing William Penn, who was a white English person who was granted the colony of Pennsylvania by King Charles II. He was the King of England at the time, who reigned from 1660 to 1685. And the reason why he granted William Penn this colony is because he was in debt to William Penn's father. So in order for him to alleviate his debt, he just granted William Penn this colony. And once William Penn acquired this colony, it led to a large influx of English people, who a lot of them were Caucasian, to immigrate to Pennsylvania, and Benjamin Franklin being one of them. So again, it says, why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? You see that? So now notice how it says, not only does he say they're not going to adopt the language and the customs of the English, but they're also not going to acquire their complexion. Because the last time I checked, the English and the Germans of the day, they're indistinguishable in terms of physical appearance. They've got the exact same complexion. So why would he mention complexion? It's not as if he's talking about, Southern Italians or Southern Spanish people, Caucasian people that are extremely tanned. He's not even talking about them. He's talking about Germans. And Germany's in Central Europe, a pre-cold climate. So Caucasians, the Caucasians who live in Germany, they don't get tanned. And it's much like England. England is a cold climate. So it can't be talking about white Germans immigrating to Pennsylvania. That just wouldn't make sense. Why would he mention complexion? So it's pretty clear that he's talking about a different group of people. So it says, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. See that? All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusive of the newcomers wholly so. So tawny is pretty much someone with brown skin. That's what tawny is in reference to, brown skin. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexions, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. So look at that. So he said, the Germans are swarthy in complexion. And we're going to see what swarthy means. Swarthy is in reference to a person with a black or dark complexion. We're going to see that. I could wish their numbers were increased. And while we are, as I may call it, scoring our planet by clearing America of woods and so making the side of our globe reflect a brighter light in the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, why should we in the sight of superior beings darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America? You see that? He said, why should we? So why would he say that? He said, why should we darken its people? And I will tell you why he said that. The reason why he said that is because he had a bunch of black Germans swarming the colony of Pennsylvania. Hence why he said what he said with regards to why should we darken its people? Because it wouldn't make sense for him to say darken its people if he was referencing white Germans. Because as I said before, white Germans and white English people, they look indistinguishable in terms of complexion. So it just doesn't make sense that they both have a white and red complexion. So that's why he says here, so reading down, he says, why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies? So he's literally associating the sons of Africa with those black Germans who was immigrating to Pennsylvania. That is clear as day, because that's the premise of this excerpt. His main problem was the fact that you had a bunch of black Germans immigrating to Pennsylvania. Hence why he said, why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America? That's why he said what he said, because he wasn't. Because some may assume that he's talking about Negroes coming from Africa, but no, that's not the context of this. That's not the context of this writing. He's not talking about Negroes coming from Africa as slaves. So he says, why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely and white red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. So he pretty much wanted Pennsylvania and America as a whole to be predominantly Caucasian. So here we're going to see what swarthy is in reference to. And over here it says the 1828 American Dictionary of the English Language. It says swarthy, being of a dark hue or dusky complexion, tawny. So remember, that's how Benjamin Franklin described those in America and in Asia as tawny complexion. And he wanted to exclude all blacks and tawnies. In warm climates, the complexion of men is universally swarthy or black. You see that? So swarthy and black can pretty much be used interchangeably. Then down here it says black as the swarthy African. So it's associating swarthy with being African too. And here is the American newspaper published during the early 1900s. It says a score of years ago, Manager McGraw signed a Negro of a swarthy complexion by the name Grant. So again, it's clear as day. He had a Negro who was being described having a swarthy complexion. So that's how you know who it was in reference to. Okay, so now we're going to be reading an interesting newspaper article that was published in 1817, and we're going to see how this person of German descent is described as. So we're going to read from the top. It says 1,500 Guinness reward, whereas sundry available jewels were stolen on Tuesday, June 17th, from the shop of Rundell Bridge and Co. by a person calling himself Simon Bloom. So that's the person in question. And Bloom is a surname of German origin, of Geneva, accompanied by another man as his interpreter. Whoever will apprehend the said Simon Bloom or his accomplice shall on conviction of either receive a reward of 250 guineas. A reward of 1,000 guineas is offered for the recovery of the whole of the property. The said Simon Bloom is a stout, well-made man, about 40, 5 feet 10 inches high, swarthy complexion, so the same swarthy complexion that Benjamin Franklin was associating the Germans with. And we just read that swarthy can be interchangeable with the term black, and swarthy was in reference to a Negro. It says marked with the smallpox, black curly hair, so in other words he had woolly hair, thick lips, so we know that thick lips is characteristic of a black person, and rather flat nose. Again, flat nose is a characteristic of a black person, not a Caucasian. Speaks French with a German accent. So that means that he was raised in France, but he was really of German descent. So he probably grew up in Germany for a certain dispensation of time. Then he probably went to France, and now he's finding himself in a bit of trouble in London. Right, so this is a piece of literature from 1849 called Minutes of the State Convention of the Colored Citizens of Pennsylvania, convened at Harrisburg, December 13 and 14, 1848, by Citizens Union of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So it's going to give a bit of insight to James Forten. So it says here, there is a black gentleman in Philadelphia County, James Forten, a sailmaker who is an exception. What is his situation? He has accumulated property, obtained a respectable standing, and in consequence of his color, is noticed more than a white man would be in the same situation. I will say, therefore, that all these attempts are fallacious, and that nothing can be done to place the colored race by the side of the whites. Okay, so the main point that I wanted to accentuate is the fact that it didn't mention anything to do with James Forten being the great-grandson of a slave that freed himself. It just simply said that he was a sailmaker who accumulated a lot of wealth, and he was a respectable citizen amongst his peers. That's all it said. So now here, another piece of literature during that time in 1855 said the colored patriots of the American Revolution, with sketches of several distinguished colored persons, to which is added a brief survey of the condition and prospects of colored Americans. So here it says, James Forten was born on the 2nd day of September 1766 and died on the Ides of March 1842. He was the son of Thomas Forten, who died when James was but 7 years old. So remember, Thomas Forten, on the Wikipedia article, it said Thomas Forten was the grandson of a slave who had freed himself. Here we see nothing of the sort. So just keep that in mind. His mother survived long after he had reached the years of maturity. In early life, he was marked for great sprightliness and energy of character, a great disposition, and indomitable courage. Always frank, kind, courteous, and disinterested. So again, we see nothing in regards to him being a descendant of a slave. Nothing of that fact. So now here's another one called Maryland Colonization Journal, published in 1835. So here it says, we notice in the Philadelphia papers the death of James Forten, a venerable and respectable man of color, long time a resident of that city. His funeral was attended by a very large concourse of both white and colored citizens, and most of the papers of that city contained very respectable and kind obituary notices of him. We had a slight acquaintance with Mr. Thornton and had reason to think very highly of him as a man of colour, integrity and true respectability. We regret most deeply, however, that he should have been so decided an opponent of the colonization cause, and we believe he has been mainly instrumental in enlisting the whole mass of the coloured population of our cities in a crusade against it. He no doubt was actuated by the best intuitions, based upon the hope of shortly seeing his brethren admitted to all the rights and privileges of citizens in the United States. But he lived not to see that day, and we much fear the Simeon is not yet born that will. So that's just going into him being the activist for the abolition of slavery. But again, we see this piece of literature published in 1835, nothing alluding to him being a descendant of a slave. Right, so for the people who still want to hold on to that narrative that this man was indeed a descendant of a slave, we're going to analyze certain statistics. Right, this is a website called slavevoyages.org, and it pretty much gives you the statistics for slavery. And so right here it says Pennsylvania, and it says 1,162 slaves was imported to the colony of Pennsylvania, right? And this was between the years of 1751 and 1800. So you had over just 1,000 slaves that got deported to Pennsylvania during 1750 to 1800. So let's keep in mind that James Thornton was born in 1766. He was born as a freeman. And the narrative is that his great-grandfather was a slave who had freed himself. Well, something that doesn't really add up, because you would assume that his great-grandfather was probably born during the late 1600s or the early 1700s. And when we analyze the stats, it says the first slaves who was imported to Pennsylvania, where it says 980 here, this was between the years of 1751 and 1775. We don't see any slaves being imported to Pennsylvania prior to that, or prior to those years. So even when we're just analysing these statistics, it doesn't really add up. And bearing in mind, because we've been able to ascertain that this person, James Thornton, his surname is of German origin, and there wasn't many German slave owners in the United States of America, if any. The majority of the slave owners were of Irish, English, or Scottish descent. So again, it doesn't really add up. So to conclude this video, I just wanted to go through this handwritten letter that was written by the man himself, James Thornton. And in this letter, he pretty much touches on the conditions that his people was going through during his time, as he was a huge advocate for the abolition of slavery. So we're just going to read what he says. Right here it says, remarks on the slavery of the black people addressed to the citizens of the United States, particularly to those who are legislative or executive stations in the general or state governments, and also to such individuals as hold them in bondage, by Paris John, published in 1806. So right here it says, the following letter from James Thornton, as it is known to be genuine and taken from the author's own handwriting, may properly follow and serve to show he is not only a man of talents, but of feeling and gratitude. So it says here, Sir, when the hand of sorrow presses heavy upon us, and the generality of mankind turn unpitying from our complaints, if one appears and feels for and commiserates our situation, endeavours in all his power to alleviate our condition, our bosoms swell with gratitude, and our tongues instinctively pronounce our thanks for the obligation. We therefore, sir, Africans and descendants of that unhappy race, respectfully beg leave to thank you for the philanthropic zeal with which you defended our cause when it was brought before the general government, by which only we can accept or expect to be delivered from our deplorable state. We interested ourselves in the business because we knew not, but ere long we might be reduced to slavery. It might have been said that we viewed the subject through a perverted medium. If you, sir, had not adopted and nobly supported those sentiments which gave rise to our petition, though our faces are black, yet we are men, and though many among us cannot write, yet we all have the feelings and passions of men, and are as anxious to enjoy the birthright of the human race as those who from our ignorance draw an arguments against our petition. When that petition has in the view the diffusion of knowledge among the African race by unfettering their thoughts and giving full scope to the energy of their minds, while some, sir, consider us as much property as an house or a ship, and would seem to insinuate that it is as lawful to hew down the one as to dismantle the other. You, sir, more humane, consider us part of the human race, and were we to go generally into the subject, would say that the principles of natural law, our thraldom is unjust. Judge what must be our feelings to find ourselves treated as a species of property and leveled with the brute creation. And think how anxious we must be to raise ourselves from this degraded state. Unprejudiced persons who read the documents in our possessions will acknowledge we are miserable, and humane people will wish our situation alleviated. Just people will attempt to task, and powerful people ought to carry it into execution. 700,000 of the human race were concerned in our petition. Their thanks, their gratitude to you, they now express. Their prayers for you will mount to heaven, for God knows they are wretched, and will hear their complaints. A deep gloom envelops us, but we derive some comfort from the thought that we are not quite destitute of friends, that there is one who will use all his endeavors to free the slave from captivity, at least render his state more sufferable, and preserve the free black in the full enjoyment of his rights. This address cannot increase the satisfaction you must derive from your laudable exertions in the cause of suffering humanity, but it serves to show the gratitude and respect of those whose cause you espoused. James Thornton, to the Honourable George Thatcher, Member of Congress. Yeah, so I just wanted to read this to illustrate some of the type of work that James Thornton was doing to alleviate the conditions of his people. During the time in which he was alive, he was a wealthy individual, a well-respected individual, a man of influence. He was respected among both blacks and whites. So I guess he used this to his advantage to do this type of work. And I just hope this video has been able to prove that this person was indeed of German descent, and he was indeed a recipient of those Germans who came to the colony of Pennsylvania during the 1700s, the same Germans that Benjamin Franklin was complaining about. And if any of you guys have any information or further information on James Thornton, feel free to, say something in the comments. And Lord willing, I'll check it out.